welcome back to the Wild Rose Moon's Moonlight series, the series that showcases the talent that surrounds us all, coming from downtown Plymouth, Indiana. Tonight we have Bruce Wakeland appearing, sharing his expertise on forestry and other stories. With him is our host, John Baylor, and me, I'm Ryan Meir. Join me as we go off into the moonlight.
Well, thank you very much for joining us for Moonlight tonight. I'm here with Bruce Wakeland, and he's a storyteller, and maybe more than anybody that we've had on here so far, his art is intimately connected with what he's done with his life. He's spent his life as a consulting forester. And so before we get into discussing storytelling, I want to just start off with discussing forestry a little bit. Why forestry? Why did you get into it? Why is it important to you?
I got into forestry because I couldn't think of anything else to do with my life. And it just one night it came down to deciding to go to college and picking out a major, and that was the only one that I could think of. And turned out that for an 18-year-old, I made an awfully smart call, because it turned every year that I was involved going through college and then getting out and actually doing the work, I became more and more sure with every day. Mm-hmm. It's just something that seems like I was meant to do.
So what seems so right about it? Or again, why is it so important what you do?
Well, I think I have a sense that I'm doing something really important for the country and for northern Indiana and for the environment. And of course, global warming is a huge thing. And the fact that during my career I've planted 10 million trees has got to be important in that regard. So it seems like in many ways what I do fits in with what's going on in the world, and it seems like I'm on the right side of the ledger on most of it. It's very rewarding to. When I was in college, I paid my way through college working on an asphalt road construction crew. And when you finish paving a new strip of highway, that was the best it was ever going to be right then.
Yeah.
And then every year after that, it got worse, and then there was potholes, and next thing you knew, you was redoing it. But when it comes to forestry and you're managing a woods right, doing a tree planting or something, it gets better every year. Mm-hmm. And one of the tremendous satisfactions is going back and working in woodlands that were just junk, or a tree planting that was a cornfield and now it's a forest, and seeing what you did. It gets better every year. And it's just very rewarding business to be in.
Right. You said 10 million trees. I think a lot of times if we use the word 10 million, we're just exaggerating. That means a lot, but
yeah, it's a lot of trees. and I think I have the ability to know how big of a number a million is. When you've planted 10 million trees, you get a concept of how big a million is. Mm-hmm. And I think I've got a better concept than just about anybody else of how big that number is.
Right. Now, you sort of mentioned this already, but why is it important that we do a good job at maintaining woodlands?
Well, woodlands have all kinds of positive things. It's one of them things you can have your cake and eat it too. It's one of the most important businesses in the state of Indiana. It's even bigger than row crop agriculture. There's more money involved in timber in Indiana than there is corn. Who would have thought that?
Yeah, right.
And most people don't realize that northern Indiana has some of the finest hardwood timber in the entire world. So how could a forester make a living working in these little 10 and 20 acre patches? Because they're so good.
Yeah.
And if you follow our logs, they go all over the world. About half of everything that we harvest in northern Indiana is exported because we've got the best in the world. And so economically, it's huge. And it's not just a single job where somebody makes money growing trees. The trees go and a sawmill's operated, and the lumber's produced, and a furniture factory is working, and they're sold the furniture, and then it goes into building a house, and then all this wood is carbon stored. Mm-hmm. It's carbon sequestration. That's a huge thing as far as our global warming issue.
Right.
And so the carbon is not just reverted back to the air when you're done growing a tree. It's in a form of a house or something, and it's another 200 or 300 years that it's sequestered.
Yeah, right.
So it's important environmentally because of water quality. There was a study shown that the number one economic value of trees isn't timber, it's water quality. Because when rain falls on a forest, it's pure water going off into the streams. Like New York City, many of our big cities pump their water out of reservoirs. And so the trees are incredibly valuable. And you can have your cake and eat it too. If you manage it right, you can harvest those trees, make lumber, and still have water quality, still have air quality. So the forestry is so important for so many things.
Okay. Well, I told you already I love what you do as a forester, but also really enjoy what you do as a storyteller. And so I don't want to delay too much. Could you share a story with us?
I brought a story that means a lot to me, actually. This story started on April 11th of 1943. And involves my grandfather, my dad's dad, Earl Wakeland. And Grandpa Earl was a farmer, and he had 80 acres in the northeast corner of Carroll County, Indiana, Adams Township. And the 80-acre farm was about midway between Logansport, Delphi, and Monticello. And it was on the high ground north of the Wabash River Valley. And Grandma and Grandpa raised 4 boys. And an 80-acre farm wasn't quite enough to raise 4 boys. And so Grandpa had another 60 acres that he was able to farm, and he farmed that ground pretty much his entire farming career. And he did it as a sharecropper. And he treated it just like his own. And it belonged actually to a agronomy professor at Oklahoma A&M College. And his name was Joe Ireland. And Joe Ireland basically never came back to Indiana. And Grandpa treated that just like it was his own. And Joe Ireland had all the confidence in the world in my grandfather and taking care of that farm, because he knew what a strong conservation ethic that my grandpa had. And in that regard, the south 14 acres of that farm, that sharecropped farm of Joe Ireland's was a woods. The northeast corner was a 2-acre, up along by the county road was a 2-acre cemetery. And to the east of the cemetery and on the north end of the farm and sloping down to the county road was this slope, and it was eroding. And part of it had been cleared that never should have been cleared years earlier. And my grandfather recognized that there was some erosion going on there. And so he decided in that spring of 1943 to plant 2,000 trees to stop that erosion. And he knew he had to plant more than just the slope. He had to plant across the top of the slope to create a buffer area between the farm ground that he was farming, the near 60 acres that he farmed. And so he found 2,000 walnut trees, bought them from the state nursery, the Indiana State Nursery, and got them picked up and delivered to the site. And the big morning for planting them was that April 11th of 1943. And the plan was that my dad, Harold, was 18 years old and just out of high school. And he was going to drive the tractor. They were going to use the old F-12 Farmall tractor, which by today's standards is an itty-bitty tractor. But by the 1943 standards, it was about a normal-sized tractor. It had the ability to pull a 2-bottom plow. And my dad had been farming with it, with Grandpa. And the plan was that my dad would drive the tractor, and Grandpa would sit on the back of the plow. And the 2-bottom plow would throw the first moldboard would throw the first furrow, and Grandpa would put the tree down, and then the second bottom would throw the dirt up against it, and the tree would be planted. I don't think OSHA would have liked that plan. I think it was kind of dangerous, but that was the plan. And that morning, the weather was good, and Grandpa went to get my dad out of bed, and my dad was sick. Had something like the flu. My dad was throwing up, had diarrhea, the whole thing. He couldn't even hardly get out of bed. And so there was no way my dad was going to be able to drive the tractor. And the grandpa figured he really needed to get him planted that day, because the next day my dad was scheduled to go to the Great Lakes Naval Station to report to the Navy, to be inducted into the Navy and join the war effort. So it was get it done that day or not. And so my grandpa had the idea, I'm going to go down to the school. Now this Joe Ireland property was a mile from where they lived. The school was a mile in the other direction, Adams Township School, and he was going to go down and see if he could get my Uncle Lewis out of school. My Uncle Lewis was 14 years old and had almost no experience driving the F-12. But he had driven it, and Grandpa knew he could at least drive it. And so he thought, I'm going to go get Uncle Lewis, because I need to get these trees in the ground, and I'm not going to have another good chance. So I went down and talked to the principal and said, can I get Lewis out of school for the day to help with this tree planting project? And the principal thought, wow, this is a neat opportunity. This is a good educational experience for Lewis. And by the way, here's 5 more boys that I think would benefit from this experience quite a bit. Why don't you take them with you too? And I think that way we got 6 boys learning about tree planting and the value of it. So off they all went down to the property, and they got the tractor going, and at the end of the day, they had them planted. They had the whole eroded area in the buffer, and they had enough for 4 more extra acres on the south edge of the cemetery. And they had it all planted, and the 5 extra boys that they sent along was great help, because they were able to open up the bundles and hand Grandpa the trees and fix the ones that weren't straight and kick dirt where it needed to be, and the whole day just went great. Uncle Lewis did a great job of driving the tractor. The next day, my dad was feeling not all that great, but he was feeling good enough, and he got on the train to go to Chicago, to the Great Lakes Naval Station, and went off to war. Obviously, he came back, otherwise I wouldn't be here telling this story. Yeah. Then in 1994, my dad went to the Adams Township High School reunion, and he went and he found several friends to talk to him. One of them was Tommy Temple, and Tommy Temple was a good friend of my dad's, and they got into a good long conversation. At one point, Tommy Temple asked my dad, "What about those trees that your dad planted out there? Whatever happened to those?" And because Tommy Temple, as it turns out, was one of those 5 boys that the principal had sent up. And my dad said, "Oh my gosh, I didn't help plant them because I was too sick." He said, so I forgot all about them. And he said, by coincidence, I have a son who's a forester. And my son would just love to go look at that tree planting. And we'll get back to you. So a week later, I'm visiting my dad, and he's telling me what he knew about this story. And within 10 minutes, we were in the car headed south to the old tree planting site. And we hiked the tree planting and looked it over. And you could still see the dead furrows along each side of each row of walnut trees. And so you could see every row that they planted. And the trees averaged 13 to 16 inches in diameter. They were beautiful trees. You could see the rows, and part of what they planted, the extra 4 acres near the cemetery, and the buffer area across the top had been crops that year before. And it turns out that made the perfect seed bed for sugar maple. So we had this beautiful stand of sugar maple and walnut, and we took photos. And when we got home, I called Uncle Lewis up, who I almost never saw because he lives in California. And I called him up, and he remembered it quite well, and I got all kinds of information. Had the longest talk I ever had with my Uncle Lewis. And I called Tommy Temple and talked to him. And I wrote an article for the Indiana Woodland Stewart. It's a magazine that goes out to 38,000 landowners who own woodlands in northern Indiana. It's a quarterly publication. And And I also interviewed the district forester who was in charge of that area. And because in 1948, 5 years after the trees were planted, my grandfather found out about an Indiana forestry program called the Classified Forest Act. And what it basically says is, if you manage your woods right and you have at least 10 acres, and they did, they had 14 acres at the south end of the farm, and they had 6 acres at the north end now because of the tree planting, and they had 20 acres, and you could put it into the classified forest program and not have to pay property taxes, because you were doing a big favor for everybody else: water quality, air quality, wildlife habitat, wood for the timber industry. So the state doesn't charge them property tax. And my grandfather in 1948 applied for that program, for that tree planting area in that other woods. And they sent out the forester in that area at that time in 1948. And his name was Carlisle Leslie. I just think that's a fantastic name. Carlisle Leslie. Carlisle Leslie went out and looked it over and made sure it qualified and wrote a report. And in 1948, 5 years after it was planted, in his report he said, "This is the finest tree planting I've ever seen." So 5-year-old tree, and I can vouch it was still a marvelous tree planting in 1994. And I wrote the article, and it was published, and it was a big hit. Got a lot of really good response back. About 2 years ago, I was in the area looking at a woods for another client, and I realized on my way home, I'm going to come pretty close to that tree plant. I'm going to swing by there and take a look. I hadn't seen it in years. Got out and hiked it, and it had just been harvested. A timber sale had just been done probably months earlier. And lo and behold, it was a really well done timber sale. It was appropriately done. The trees that were cut were obviously mature. They weren't overcut. There was still a good, healthy, productive woods left behind. And it was exactly what the whole idea was all about. It was a complete success even to this very day. So we had, instead of an eroded bunch of gullies headed down towards the county road, we had this productive, beautiful forest. And it just really made me proud of what my grandfather had accomplished. And maybe some of that conservation ethic rubbed off on me, because I spent 2 summers with him as a kid down there on the farm.
Well, thank you, Bruce, for sharing. I would like to ask a few questions about the story, but before we dig into it, I just want to start with, where did you get into storytelling? Because in there you mentioned writing this article for the journal. How did you get into telling stories about this stuff?
Well, mostly it's the Wild Rose Moon's fault. My wife and I would come and for the programs and talking to George and I got to thinking about it, and I realized when I go to forestry meetings, one in particular, the Consulting Foresters Organization, it's a national organization, and my wife and I would go, and we knew this couple from Columbus, Ohio, and we would always get together at all these. I've been to every state in the nation except Delaware and Hawaii, going to these forestry meetings over the years. And we would meet this one couple, and it was just always a reunion every time. And we would sit around and have a beer or something and tell stories, because he was a forester just like I was. And he liked to tell stories, and I liked to tell stories. And his wife would think, someday you guys need to write a book. These is really good, these stories. And so I got to wondering, after coming to the Moon here for programs, would the other foresters like my stories, but would the public like my stories? Because, and if they did, what a great way to educate people, if they did like them. Mm-hmm. And I never forget the first night I told a story here at the Moon, first time I ever told a story in public other than just around a table or something at a meeting. And it's really different being on the stage. And I'd been in the audience, but being on the stage, there's the audience right there. And you can see their faces. I mean, it's like instant, you knew exactly what they were thinking, basically. Mm-hmm. And it was very positive. Within 10 seconds, I knew this was working.
Yeah, right.
They actually were interested in my forestry stories. This is great. And then it was a week later. And it wasn't even a week later. This was a Wednesday night, open mics on a Wednesday night. And just 2 days later, Friday night, my wife and I are back in the audience for a group. It's doing singing. It was a 3 or 4 member group. And one thing I've learned about musicians, I have no musical talent at all. But they always have somebody who's like a designated little storyteller, because the musicians like to tune their guitars, and it's an awkward little moment or two. And so somebody has to fill the gap with, have to make some remarks or tell a joke.
Storytelling is very valuable.
Yeah, and there was a lady. The lady on the end was the designated storyteller. And she looks out, she pointed right at me. I'm in trouble now. She says, I was there Wednesday night when you told your forestry story. Well, it really surprised me because they were from out of state. I think they were from Massachusetts or something. So I didn't know why they were there 2 nights early. Maybe because they were doing your radio show or something. But anyway, and she says, boy, I really enjoyed your story. I'm thinking, oh, whew. And she says, when something is the subject of a story, it gives it importance. That's why I do it. Mm-hmm. She said it better than I could have said it.
So then we'll shift back to the story there. I was also going to ask, why tell this story? Why is this an important one to share? And maybe that's part of the answer. Yeah. Why is this something that you want to give importance to?
Yeah, because, why am I a forester? I think we asked that question, and there's no one answer to that. I think your life is molded by all sorts of things. Mm-hmm. But I really think that in hindsight, it's all hindsight, but I really think that my grandfather, because my dad was a mechanic, my other brother is a maintenance person, and my other brother is an aeronautical engineer. I'm the forester. I'm the only forester in the Wakeland family that I ever know. And how did that happen?
Right.
And I really think that my grandfather's conservation ethic had a lot to do with it. Mm-hmm. And you can't be around somebody that's important to you, that has such a strong ethic, that you got to pick up on it, I think. So I think that's part of the reason I told this story, because it's kind of unique that I'm a forester. My grandfather planted 2,000 trees back in the days when basically nobody did something like that. But it's more than that. I really think it had something to do with me being a forester.
Well, as far as putting importance on it, though, why is that something that you want to share with others, that story?
I think because people don't know what a forester even is. They don't, what's a forester do? Are you a timberjack? Do you do logging? And that sort of thing. And then loggers have a bad reputation. Oh, they're destroying the forest. They're cutting it all down. Well, couldn't be further from the truth. Logging and timber production gives it economic value. What better way to preserve something than to give it economic value? It's out there producing. It's making money for the landowner. So it actually means it's more likely to be there in the future if you're doing properly done timber sales. And yet, so people have this negative attitude about, oh my God, cutting down a tree, it's terrible. And so I just feel it's important to paint it in the right light, to show forest management and timber production, that you can have your cake and eat it too, like I said earlier.
Yeah, right.
You can have all these things. And what better way than getting up there and telling stories and having people like you and go away with a good attitude about forestry and foresters. Mm-hmm.
Now, I will ask this question. I got to set this up a little bit. We have a lot of artists that come in here, and they're very eager to talk about their influences. If it's a musician, they want to talk about musicians that they wanted to be like. And poets and playwrights, they've all picked out these artists that they want to be like. And I want to ask, is there anybody like that, a storyteller, that's been a big influence on you?
Not a storyteller. There's been a lot of people that's been a big influence.
Right.
But the storytelling is a little bit my idea, and it's a little bit Wild Rose Moon's idea, but I don't really have a strong, in the American Chestnut Foundation, which I'm on the board of directors, and it's very important to me. My next story I'm going to tell in the next half hour has to do with it a little bit with the American Chestnut Foundation. They have One of our board, well, he's not currently a board, he's an ex-Forest Service from Kentucky, and he's very important to our organization, and he was a storyteller. So he gave me the idea, and his son is a storyteller, as it turns out, and he actually does classes on telling stories. And they set up a class because they thought, what a great way to promote the American chestnut by telling stories.
Right.
And so and I actually delayed telling stories at the Moon for a whole year, waiting on that class that they were going to teach to the people on the board of directors. I was very disappointed in the class. It was almost all about why we should tell stories, and only a little bitty piece of it was about actually telling stories.
Yeah.
I should have started a year earlier than I did. But I guess so that was also part of the idea. But there was no one person really there that was an inspiration.
Okay. I mean, it sounds like
they helped. There's a lot of places that gave me the ideas, and you add it all together, and here you are.
Right. I mean, it sounds like it's something. Of course, storytelling is natural, and everybody tells stories, and some people enjoy doing it more than others. But you were telling earlier about the friend that you meet at all the conventions, and
Yes.
that's what you do, is sit and tell stories.
Sit
with each
around,
other.
tell stories, and we just always enjoyed it. We always tried to outdo the other one.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, but in a way, it seems like that's a very informal, like almost accidental way of developing the skill, but it still helps you develop that skill. Okay, well, we'll be back in half an hour. We're going to take a break, so you guys can get yourself something to eat, but don't go too far away. We'll have Bruce Wakeland here for another half-hour segment and get to hear about some chestnut trees. Maybe it seems like a deep dark night deep dark night. But follow me outside into the moonlight.
Welcome back to the Wild Rose Moonlight series, the series that showcases the talent that surrounds us all, coming from downtown Plymouth, Indiana. Tonight we have Bruce Wakeland appearing, sharing his expertise on forestry and telling him in his own unique way. With him is our host, John Baylor, and me, I'm Ryan Meir. Join me as we go off into the moonlight.
Welcome back to Moonlight. We're here once again with Bruce Wakeland, who's a storyteller and consulting forester. And I want to start off, Bruce, by asking you about 129 acres in Stark County, land that you owned and you donated to the county. I'm compelled to ask you about this because, you know, as a young man, if I had 129 acres of woods, I'd keep it. And if I weren't going to keep it, then I'd sell it. So I just want to hear what your take is. Why would you make the decision to donate the land to the county?
I decided to give it for really the same reason that I'm telling stories, because I wanted the public to know about the value of our forest lands. And what better way than giving them a place to go? Because there have more and more as we get into the future, the general public has fewer places to go out and enjoy it and see it, and to try to understand it. And I gave this 129 acres through a trust that an attorney and I put together, which spells out how the county can use it, and it's to be used as a county forest. And the difference between a county forest and a county park is that a county park maintenance and everything is paid for by gate fees. You know, if you go to a park, you often have to stop at the gate and pay a fee. Or if you don't have a gate fee, the local taxes pay for it. But something has to pay for maintenance and everything. In a forest, just like in a state forest or a national forest, or in this case, a county forest, maintenance and everything is paid for by selling timber. And so here people can go, and it's a beautiful place. I think it is, and everybody that I've talked to that's been out there agrees with me. It's a beautiful place. And you can go for a hike. There's up to 5 miles of hiking trails. There's 3 miles right now that we're maintaining, and 2 more that we'll be adding. And you can see stumps from where we've sold timber, and yet it's still a beautiful, ecologically valuable place that's contributing to wildlife and air quality and water quality. So you can have your cake and eat it too. And people need to actually go out and enjoy it. And by the way, geez, this is still a beautiful place, even though they sell timber that pays the bills.
Yeah.
And so really that was, I thought it was a unique property. I originally bought most of it in 1985, and 10 years ago now, in 2011 or 12, somewhere in there, is when I gave it to the county. And it's got a marvelous parking lot. It's on Division Road in Stark County. A mile and a half. If you're in Marshall County and you drive on 12th Road, it becomes Division Road in Stark County. It's another mile and a half, and there's a sign, Stark County Forest, and a parking lot, and it's open to the public, and it's got an observation tower over an 18-acre marsh, and this past year, an ornithologist, Mark Crom, the science teacher at Knox, did a survey, and in the first year he counted 124 different species of birds back there. It's just a marvelous property, and he would have gotten more if it hadn't had a drought and part of the marsh dried up, and so there was not a lot of migratory ducks this year. And so I gave it for that reason, and I still manage it. So I was never going to sell it anyway.
Yeah.
I was going to keep it until the day I died anyway. So I was never going to sell it and make my money that way. And I can still enjoy it. I still live on the 26 acres that I kept there for myself. And so I manage it. And every time we sell timber, that money goes into the account that's dedicated for maintenance of the property. And it's getting more and more usage all the time. There's people back there every day hiking the trails.
So where is that if viewers want to visit?
I think the address would be 10655, I think it is, Division Road in Stark County.
Okay.
So
Now-
you can Google that, and there's a sign there in a parking lot.
Your first answer to that question of why would you donate the land was you would donate the land for the same reason that you tell stories. And for you, that was about education. And when I hear that sentence, there's I hear more than education. And I just you can respond to this if you want to. But I think most people who tell stories or create art will say they're doing it because it's beautiful, and if something's beautiful, you do it, you create it. And in the same way, when it comes to caring for the land, you did use the word beautiful to describe the property.
Yeah, it is. It is beautiful.
But I find also in the caring for a wood lot and in donating to the county, also this act of education, but also something beautiful that you're doing with your life.
Yep, yeah, it's very satisfying, and the people being out there and enjoying it, and yeah, there's a definite satisfaction in the knowledge that you're preserving something that's pretty special with all the water and the trees, and it's so diverse. Some places, if you've seen 1 acre of it, you've seen the whole place. This is not that way at all. This 129 acres, it's a little bit different around every bend in the trail.
Yeah, right.
And so that's part of what makes it not just beautiful, but also a lot of diversity. So I think it's valuable for the public to see and to understand, and maybe someday they'll go to the voting booth to vote for something, and they'll have a little bit more knowledge, and they'll vote for conservation instead of for a new housing development or something like that. So I think to have an educated group of voters is a very important thing too.
If I can interject here, we got a couple questions from the audience. Might be able to make them quick. See, what's the most common hardwood tree in Indiana? You know, off the top of your head, what that is?
The most common? No, I do not. And the reason for that is that it's one of those that you answer. It depends on where you are, because the hardwood trees are very specific to different soil types and different geologies, and it's going to be different in northern Indiana or southern Indiana. There's enough different in the climate from other northern and southern Indiana that we have different trees up here than they do down there. We have some overlap, but we have some different trees, and plus there's so many different species. Even on a highly productive woodlot of 20 acres in northern Indiana, there's going to be 15 to 20 different species.
Wow.
So it just really depends on the soil type and the history of a given site. What's been the past history makes a huge difference as to what's there now.
Okay.
And so it's so variable. Part of what makes my job interesting, being a forester, interesting, because you got to deal with so many different species, but it makes that answer to that question almost impossible to answer.
Still an answer. Do you have a favorite tree?
No.
There's just too many species.
I love them all. I've asked myself that.
Yeah.
Because I've been asked that before. And I've asked myself that. And really, I don't. And the longer you're in the business, the more you even appreciate the low-value, junky ones. The trees that really don't have much value. They're not as beautiful, but you learn so much about them, and they're so unique, and they're special in their own way. And the more you know about them, the more you like them all, actually. How, you would have to say that American chestnut is, if I had to say, it would, but it's more, and I certainly dedicate more of my time and effort to saving the American chestnut tree, because it is a marvelous tree, and it is in danger of being lost. And we are working very hard on saving that tree. And I guess I certainly spend more time on that one species than any others.
Yeah.
But I just kind of, longer I'm in it, the more I love them all.
Okay. Cool.
Okay, thanks, Ryan, because I was going to ask what I could remember of those questions, and I wasn't going to do a very good job of it.
The other ones are going to elicit long answers, so I don't want to crunch
Yeah.
into your story time here.
Yeah.
Okay, well, since we mentioned the chestnut tree, you said you had a story about chestnuts.
It has chestnut in it.
Okay.
It's more of a story about an airplane.
Yeah.
But it's
Okay,
about
if it's got
chestnut.
an airplane in it, I'm game for that, too.
Yeah, I love airplanes. Yeah, I got a brother that's an aeronautical engineer, so I think it runs in the family, the love of airplanes. But this story goes back to about 15 years ago, and I got a call from Don Bailey. He's a client that I have over at Lowell, Indiana, and I guess a lot of people don't know where Lowell, Indiana is. It's not the most exciting place, but if you went straight from Plymouth towards the Illinois line, and just before you get into Illinois, that's Lowell, Indiana, and that's where this ownership is. It's on the other side of US 41 even. It's getting pretty close to Illinois line. And Don Bailey has several woods that he owns, and he's 84 years old. And I've known him because he's been an active member of the Indiana Forestry and Woodland Owners Association. So I've known Don Bailey for some time, and he was, probably because of his age, he was working on his estate planning. And he had a woods, and he wanted me to inventory it and appraise the value of the trees in the woods. And so to do that, you gotta go measure the trees and figure out what's there before you can put a value on it. So it was one day about 15 years ago, and it was in early July, and I went over and did the field work. Spent a good part of the day measuring trees in his woods. And it was about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I finished the job, and I realized, I've never been to Don Bailey's house, and I was only about a mile away. So I thought, I'll just go see if Don's at home and say hi and tell him what I found in the woods. And I didn't have the numbers yet, so I didn't have the numbers worked up. I couldn't tell him the value yet, but at least I could tell him what I found, and we could talk about the woods. And as I'm approaching his house, I realized, wow, there's an airstrip. He's got a grass runway. And I didn't know Don was into airplanes, but that's pretty neat. And behind his house is this pretty good sized hangar, an airplane hangar. Oh, pretty neat. So I pull in, and there's Don out in the front yard, and we got he had some chairs under a shade tree, and we sat down and started talking about the woods, but that didn't last too long. Pretty soon we're talking about airplanes. And we're talking about airplanes, and he's telling me about how he got involved in airplanes. And he was a fighter pilot during the Korean War. And he flew the only prop airplane they used in the Korean War. They were using those Sabre jets by the Korean War, and most of the fighter planes were jets. But they flew a Corsair, and it was the only fighter plane that was kept from World War II that was still used during the Korean War. And they really liked them because they were slower than the jets, and they were much more maneuverable, and they could fly around and shoot them down pretty easy because of maneuverability. And the fact that they were slower was almost actually an asset. Anyway, so Don was telling me about how they had to land them on the aircraft carrier. He was stationed on an aircraft carrier out in the ocean, and they flew into Korea from there. And he said that on a Corsair, you sit back quite a ways from the nose of the plane. The cockpit is kind of almost in the middle of the plane. And when you're approaching an aircraft carrier to land, it's not easy because it's a small target to land on, and it's moving to boot. And to make it worse, you can't see the aircraft carrier because of the nose of the Corsair sticks out in front too far, and you can't even see what you're trying to land on. So in order to land, you have to go in a C shape. You have to fly in a curve so that you're always looking off to the side of the plane, and you can always see the aircraft carrier because you're on this big left-handed turn. And so you can see the aircraft carrier. And then at the last minute, when you finally straighten up to land, you can't see the aircraft carrier. You just got to land. It's kind of exciting. Anyway, so we were doing all this conversation, and he says, "Oh, you want to go back and see the planes?" I thought, I thought you was never going to ask. Of course I want to go see the planes. So we go back, and he had 6 airplanes in hangar, and some of them were other people that rented space and used his airstrip. But he had 2 airplanes, and the one that really caught my eye was called an Aranca Champion. And it was, he said, this was originally built in 1949. And I said, that's the year I was born. I was born in 1949. And he said, well, but this airplane's been totally refurbished, inferring that I hadn't been, I guess. But anyway, so the airplane was totally refurbished. He said, it's just like new now. And an Aranca Champ was really for people that know about airplanes, it's really an important airplane, because it was like the Piper Cub. A lot of people have heard of the Piper Cub. Well, it was a competitor to the Piper Cub. They're both little airplanes that seat 2 people, and they're tail draggers. And the difference between them, there are 2 different companies that made them, but the Piper Cub usually the 2 people sit side by side, and on the Aranca, one person's in the front and one's in the back. Anyway, so we're talking about that, and he said, "You want to go for a ride?" And I didn't think he was ever going to ask. Of course I want to go for a ride. I learned a long time ago, when somebody asks you if you want to go for an airplane ride, do it. Because they really don't feel like you're putting them out. They want to go. They're the ones who really wants to go for the airplane ride. They're just looking for an excuse to go for flying. And so I'm going to do you a big favor, and I'm going to say yes, let's go flying. So you remember Don Bailey's 84 years old, and I didn't even think about that. And he grabs the rear end of this plane, the tail, and he drags it out of the hangar and heads down across the tarmac towards the fuel pumps. He's dragging this plane. Okay. And anyway, so he's sitting there he's fueling it up, and he's doing the pre-flight check, and he said, "Where do you want to go?" And I said, "Well, you know what? I was just thinking about that." And I said, about 15 miles south of here is Roselawn, Indiana. And the state champion chestnut trees at Roselawn, Indiana, and there's at least 3 other trees we found in that grove. And I said, I've always wondered if there's any other, we're not sure how those chestnut trees got there, but I've always wondered if there's other ones around. And one of the ways they find American chestnut, especially in the mountains, is they fly little planes like this Aranca, and they look for them when they're in bloom. They got the white catkins all over them, and it's at the beginning of July, and most everything else is already done blooming. And so you can see like this white snowball in the trees, and that's how they find chestnut trees. And I said, I'd love to go down and fly around and see if there's any of those. It might be a little too late, but they may still be in bloom. It's getting near the end of it though. He said, okay, so we flew down to Roselawn, went across the Kankakee River. It was beautiful, and we found that tree right away. And Don starts flying around, and he's got the wing clear up on the tip, and we're going around and around. And he looks back at me because he's in the front seat flying the thing. He says, "The barf bag, by the way, if you need it, is in the window." And I was just thinking exactly that, actually. I was beginning to wonder if I was going to lose my lunch before we got out of there. Anyway, so it turns out that it was a little bit too late, and the catkins that make the white color had started to turn brown and fall off, so we didn't find any more trees. And so we headed back to Don's and got to cross the Kankakee River in the old marsh again, and that was neat. And all the way back we had a tailwind from the south. We had this tailwind. And so I know enough about airplanes to know that we were going to have to fly past the airstrip and do a big loop and come back and land into the wind, because you need to land. When you go real slow, you need to have that wind to give you lift, and so that's a nice, easy landing. So that's exactly what was going on. We get close to the airstrip, but Don was flying lower than I expected. He was pretty low, and he was just off to the right side of the airstrip. I could look out my window, and it was like right there, and I could almost see the blades of grass. He was so low. And so I'm thinking, okay, he's going to go out over this field, and we're going to loop around. And all of a sudden, he stands this airplane up on the wing, and we're at a 90-degree angle, and he just did 180 just so quick, I didn't even know it was happening, and we're on the ground that quick. And I didn't even have time to be afraid, and I had visions of landing a Corsair on an aircraft carrier, because it must have been just about the same thing. and we're taxiing down the strip back towards the hangar, and I remember thinking, boy, I hope I'm as vibrant and capable as he is when I'm 84.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, heck of a story. Well, thank you very much, Bruce, for sharing that. I want to ask, how do you know when you've got a story that's worth telling? I think if a lot of people look back on their lives, they say, "I couldn't do what you're doing. I don't have the stories." How do you know when you have something?
Good question. I started out. Well, I told you, I mentioned in the earlier segment that I've been telling stories, at forestry meetings and around other foresters and stuff. So I had already told certain number of stories, but I sat down when I got involved with the Moon and had the idea of telling stories at open mic, and I made a list, and I had this big full pad of 8 by half by 11 pad of lined paper. I think it was like 30 lines or something like that on each one.
Mm-hmm.
And I started on each line writing a story idea. And I filled in an entire page, ripped that off and filled in another page. I had 2 pages just at the first time thinking about stories. And I think part of it is that when you're out there, I've had over 3,000 clients. That is a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
And every little woods is different. There's no two alike. And every landowner is different. There's no two alike. And we did a lot of different things in forestry. We planted trees. We did marked and sold timber for landowners. We do appraisals. And I appeared in court. I was one of the few people that qualify as an expert witness in court. And so there's just we just do management plans and so there's just so many interactions with people and places. And so there's just after you've had 3,000 clients, there's just so many stories that happen. There's so much stuff that happens.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started making these lists and I started putting them in categories. And one category that I called, I haven't always been a forester, which probably should have just been called How Did I Become a Forester? That probably should have been what it was called. And one category was about all the different jobs that we did, tree planting category and timber sales. And so I ended up with one category about, because of being an expert witness in court, I saw that there really isn't a lot of timber theft out there. There's very little, actually.
Mm-hmm.
But when there was, I often got called up to be an expert witness testifying, and so I know about most of them. Some of them were amazingly interesting stories, and so I got a category. I haven't told any of them yet, but I probably will. And
Well, probably some good ones in there.
yeah, there's a few unbelievable ones, I'll tell you. But I hesitate to tell those because all in all, timber buyers and loggers are really good, interesting people. I really like them a lot, and they themselves are very interesting people. But so how do I get my stories? And I'm still adding. I actually, my list is just about as long now as it was when I started, because I keep coming up with new ideas of what makes a story. I'm learning what makes a story. And I've got a group of stories that I haven't told yet that they're good ones because I haven't come up with an ending for them.
Mm-hmm.
And the ending is very important. You got to, like the one I just told. I hadn't told that story about Don Bailey for a long time because I couldn't decide how to end it.
Yeah, right.
And finally I decided I'm going to end it by using him as an example of how I hope I can live to be as vibrant as he was at 84. I thought that, and I got to tell about Chestnut a little bit too. So, so I have some stories that I just haven't figured out how to end them yet. And I don't embellish my stories at all. I decided when I started, I'm going to tell these stories as honestly and as accurate as I can. And I'm not going to embellish them to make them funnier and more interesting. They're pretty good, I think, the way they are.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been kind of pleased. The one that I told earlier about my grandfather, that one was very well documented. And I was very pleased when I put that story together, how well my memory had held together.
Yeah.
So if they're not accurate, it's because my memory is not accurate. But I've got most of these files, I got client files. I can go get dates and names and everything. So I try to be as accurate with my stories as I can. That's just something I decided to do.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with embellishing them and trying to make them funnier or more interesting, but I decided to tell them as accurate as I can.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned working with endings. You have a good story idea, but you don't know how to end the thing. What are some other? I guess I just want to ask, what's your editing process when you have an idea? You put something down on paper. Do you mostly go with what comes out, or
Not even close.
No.
Oh my gosh, I was asked one time. George said this to me. George Schricker said, "You look real comfortable up there in front of the microphone." Not even close. The reason that I look comfortable is I rehearse these stories over and over. I'll bet I rehearsed both of these stories tonight at least 20 times each.
Mm-hmm.
And that's 15 minutes a shot.
Yeah.
So the reason that I feel comfortable is that I really get good at telling them. And what I found is that the more you rehearse them, the better it's not just that it gives you confidence that you can tell the story in a logical manner. And a lot of mine need to be chronologically right to make them work. Mm-hmm. Or you can, change that order and still be true to the story. But the more I tell them, the better I get at it. And I've learned to take things out that may have been important to me, but really to that audience, they don't care. It's not important to the story. It's not important to the listener. Mm-hmm. And so I've learned, that's one of the biggest things I learned. What's interesting to me that I can take out. And by chance, the open mic they give you 15 minutes apiece. And I don't know if that was by accident or on purpose, but I think that is just almost the perfect length for a story. I think anything more than that's too long. And I always start out, I'm usually 20 minutes, and I get them down. And that one I told a little bit ago, I got it down from 20 minutes to 13 minutes. And so I think the practice is important, and the timing is important, and for the story. And the ending is crucial. Some of the stories are interesting, but they just kind of end, and they don't. So they're still on my list. Someday I'll figure out how to end them, maybe.
Well, before long, we're going to have to figure out how to end this. And I want to ask you just one more question, and maybe we can wrap up with this. When you tell a story, what effect do you hope that it has on the listener?
Well, I hope they enjoy the story. And like I said, at the open mic, you can usually tell because you can see it in their faces. Mm-hmm. So I hope they enjoy the story, but I hope they learn something from it, which is why I'm here.
Yeah.
I hope they have a more feel about forestry and forest management and the importance of our forest land for all the different reasons. And every story usually has one of those reasons at the core of it.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Okay, well, thank you very much, Bruce, for joining us tonight and for your stories that you had to share with us. And thank you to everyone we got around here helping. Thank you to Michelle Schricker. Thank you to George and Jim and Matt and Ryan. And Jennifer, she's back in the corner, right? I can't see her very well. But thank you for all the helpers that came, and thank you for joining us tonight. I had a good night. I hope you did as well.
Wild Rose Moonlight series is brought to you by Johnson Danielson Funeral Home, Jim and Terry Weldy, Ely Marshall and Barbara Wynn, Psi Iota Xi of Bremen, Indiana, Marshall County Community Foundation, and all of us here at the Moonlight Studio. Thanks for joining us.
it seems like a deep dark night. But follow me outside into the Maybe it seems